My Kuakuwa name is Kuakuwa, and I'm Zaudena from Kinkum Inlet of the Kuakuwa Chiefs. And I'd like to start by, I guess, expressing appreciation for being in these territories. I'm a guest here, and I'm honored to speak within this absolutely stunning landscape. So I want to talk about some of our histories, and I'll talk about my artwork a bit. But in order to understand my artwork, it seems really important for me to share our history. So I just want to show the location of where I come from. So if you can see the Kuakuwa territory, we're neighbors to the Nicholson. And some of our cultural traditions have shared stories, and amongst the Zaudenoch in particular, we live in this little valley here in Kinkum Inlet, and this is our village of Guai. That valley that you can see there, our original ancestor came down from the mountains throughout the valley. They say at the beginning of time when light first came into the world, and he established us there in this place. His name was Kaudilikla. He was a great wolf, and very early on in our histories, a great flood happened, and when that occurred, Kaudilikla was able to survive that. He created a catamaran, and it floated to the top of a mountain. And when the water started to recede, he called out in four directions, and finally he received an answer, and that answer came from the Eskimo who live on the northern part of Vancouver Island. And so that made his heart glad, because he then knew that other people had survived the flood. And then they say that the Eskimo also called out, and they were answered by the people in a house. And so they were also happy to know that other relatives had also survived the flood. So we have an ancient connection within our lands and within our histories. This is a work that I did in 1998, and it doesn't have a title, it's just a cliff painting that exists at the mouth of the river. And I wanted to show it first because everything that I'm going to talk about relates to this painting and why this painting was done. So this pictograph is, it's 38 feet high, it's 28 feet wide, and it shows the great wolf Kaudilikla within the what we call Kuakuwa, copper shape, which is a symbol of our wealth amongst our nations. And it shows our origin story of how he came down from the mountain with this great treasure box on his back, which is our great dances that he brought with him. And then it has the 4 stars of the Muskmak tribes underneath it. This is just to show the scale of the work. And this is the first time that I attempted it. And I failed the first time that I attempted it, and I had to come back and try again. And that's me in the white t-shirt, that kind of small white dot there. And then I had to, but it was good to learn from that first attempt, and I was able to come back with a scaffold. And we used this movable scaffold in order to create the piece. So you can kind of see the wolf with the treasure box on his back with the sun coming up behind him. Anyways, this work was really, really political. And I did it because I really felt that we were being rendered invisible within our own lands. And the logging companies had been there for 100 years, and they had been taking logs out of our valley, and we didn't really have much of a say in it. If we were lucky, we got a couple of jobs out of it. So billions and billions of dollars were going out of our valleys, and we had no say, and we had no jurisdiction. And I felt the need that I needed to understand why was this happening. And so if we go back, then at the top you can see the little dots are our houses. That's our village right there, Guai in Kinkum Inlet. But this is a very early survey, and it shows how the surveyors came in, late 1800s, and they were surveying the land for its value. And they created these lots. And then you can see the farm lots that they created, right up to where our village is. Everything was kind of created into lots like this. And then as part of, this poster is part of a display that I saw for Canada 150, and if you read it at the top, it says, Canada, the country of opportunities, free land for all. So it was the advertisement that went out in Europe and other places for colonial people to come and that they would receive free land. Well, the free land that they're talking about are these lots below our village. So the farmers came in and they were actually given lots of 160 acres. And then through the Land Commission process, this is a photograph from McKenna McBride Land Commission, but through this process in 1914, it was told to our chiefs that they could come and meet with the commission and that they would be able to say like what lands were theirs. So our chiefs came, and this is a really important slide to look at because our Kuakuwa Chiefs came, and this is an image of them at the 1914 Land Commission process. They came in their regalia, and their regalia is their title documents to their lands. So all the regalia that they wear in this photograph, they have a right to wear because they've publicly shown to the other Kuakuwa nations that their stories within our big house, within our traditions. And by validating those stories publicly, and those stories tell of how they came to be in the land. So everything they wear, they have a right to wear because it ties them to their ancient place. So they came to the commission process with their title documents, and their title documents are what they wear upon their body. And they explained to the commission what lands were theirs. And through the commission process, and I've read the transcripts, our chiefs would indicate this place, that place. And the commission would reply, that is a timber lot, no, you can't have that. That's been given away, that's already allocated. And then our chiefs ask, well, what if you give us 200 acres per person? And the commission replied, no, that's not what's going to happen, but we can talk about 5 to 10 acres for you. And our chiefs replied, 5 to 10 acres each for each person, and they said no for your community. And so if I go back to this is what we ended up with. We ended up with this tiny, tiny little dot on the coast. And we have 7 of them, but they're all very small, maybe like half a mile to a mile, and ours is, the main one we live on is about 3 square miles. In that process, then, that's when the rest of our lands were being removed from our jurisdiction and given away to settlers. So our people have fought against this process for many years, and they've consistently spoken up against it. If you read the commission files, they're always constantly asking, we do not understand how our land title has been removed from us when we did not agree to it. And it's a huge issue in British Columbia that still remains to this day. But I wanted to talk about how our people responded to that through artistic means. And one of the interesting things was that on the farmlands, this is a photograph of a pole that was put up on the farmlands. And it was put up on the farmlands by my great uncles. And it was interesting at the time because there was a newspaper article that read that the native people are so friendly in Kinkim Inlet, they put up a welcome pole for the settlers. And when I'm looking at the whole context of everything that was happening back then, because Johnny Scow, who was responsible for putting this pole up, he also represented us as in his chiefly position at the McKenna McBride Commission, and he had argued against the loss of our lands. So I really believe they put this pole up, and it's right on the farmlands as a statement to say, these are our lands. But it was, the perception of that was quite different. Certainly in the colonial newspaper where I saw the article about how friendly we were. So it's a strategy. And it was really interesting because the farmers who came into our territories and were settling those lands there, one of them stayed, and he had quite a close relationship with the people in the village. But the other one became the Indian agent, William Halliday. And William Halliday was really well known he became really well known for prosecuting the Kuakuwa and putting them in jail for their potlatch practices. And in 1921, William Halliday was able to, I guess, convict. He actually appointed himself the judge of the case. And then he was able to convict a large number of Kuakuwa people for potlatching, just for practicing their culture. And then he said to them that if they gave up their regalia to him, then they could receive suspended sentences and wouldn't have to go to jail. So some of our people did that. They gave up their masks. And this is a picture of, one picture. There were many, many, many masks that were given up. And this is a picture of just a few of them that were put up in the hall in Alert Bay. So when William Halliday received these masks, he put them on display in the community hall, and he charged 25 cents for people to come and see these masks. And in a way, it was one of the first major transformations of our traditions into what we see today in modern times, because our people in the past never showed these things. They were actually kept very secret, and they only showed them during our ceremonials. But now these things were exposed, and they were put fully on display for people to come and pay money to look at. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because things are not that different today. So today when you go to the major museums, you also will see these masks, other masks that have been collected, massive collections. All over the world you will see this type of a display of our things, what our people call tlugwe, our treasures. And so I want to point that out because we still live with that today. You know, the transformation of what we considered our title and how we confirm our title publicly has now been transformed into something to look at, something to be consumed. So it is another form of like internal resistance. So 1921 was the time that our people were being put in jail for potlatching, and my great uncles and my great grandfather were responsible for this pictograph at the mouth of the river. And this was the pictograph that inspired me to do the really large pictograph. And this pictograph was done in 1921, and it was done to commemorate potlatches that were held in Kinkum. If you think about it, at that time, people were going to jail for potlatching. So they chose to have this potlatch, and what they did was they purchased cows from the farmer at the mouth of the river. And of course, the farmer was the brother of the Indian agent. And in purchasing the cows, they sort of implicated him in what they were doing, or at least contested in a very interesting way the legality. So they purchased the cows, and they brought them up on this ship called the Satsuma. You can see the painting of the ship in the pictograph. And they brought them up to the village, and they feasted with them. They feasted the people. So they were doing what was considered to be illegal, and was in fact, and like that people were being put in jail at that time. And then they go and do this, and then on top of that, they go to the mouth of the river and they document it, and they make it a very public statement. And I've always been really inspired by this because I thought it was incredibly brave and sophisticated and beautiful. And this is a modern photograph that I took. So they did that. They actually wrote the year into that pictograph. 1921 is written on the rock face. And this is what the pictograph looks like today. So it's almost 100 years later, and it's still there, and it's still speaking to us. It's still speaking to my generation. So it's remarkable art practice. So then what was happening at that time also was that our children were being taken away from our communities and put into the residential school. And this is a photograph of St. Mike's Residential School in Alert Bay, which is where my mother went. She was sent to this school when she was 8 years old. And I thought it was an interesting image because if you look at the posts in the background, they've removed the posts from the house, the traditional house, and they've placed them in front of the residential school, almost like monuments or decorations, but in a way they're transforming them. The authorities that chose to do that were transforming it in an extraordinarily symbolic way. So these children the attempt was being made to transform them, and at the same time the art form was being transformed as well into a different type of language. So these poles were saying something different from what they originally were intended for. But at the same time that this was happening, because St. Mike's was opened in 1929, our chiefs in Kinkum decided that what they needed to do was to figure out a way to continue our traditions, despite the illegality through Canadian law of what they were doing. So in a way, they very creatively proposed to the church that they celebrate the passing of King George V with the totem pole. Well, the Indian agent at the time, who was no longer William Halliday, he really protested this, and he kept saying to the bishop, who was very enamored of this idea, that they were trying to pull the wool over his eyes, and they were basically just like wanting to find a way to continue to practice their traditions. And sure enough, you can see the bishop just underneath the pole in the white. He's wearing his like church regalia, and on his head he has a headpiece that our old people gave him as part of that ceremonial. And you can see the British flags all around, and in some of these photographs there's a sign that says, "God save the King." But in the long run, what they were really doing, and this amazes me because they managed to have that pole carved at a time when all of this stuff was, being completely transformed through colonization. They had this pole created, and today it still stands in Kinkum Inlet, and it more or less frames our political idea, our identity of who we are, because the pole actually tells the ancient story of the 4 tribes of the Muskamak Dawdenoch. And that's what they managed to do this very strategically. And not only that, they were able to have themselves photographed with all of their regalia on. And if you remember the McKenna-McBride Commission, they also at that time, that this was showing their legal title to their lands and their understanding of who they were. And this is the headpiece that was given to the bishop, and the bishop's family held on to this until I guess maybe I don't know how many years ago, and then it was collected by a collector, and then very recently I saw it at the Museum of Anthropology and was completely stunned to see this piece because I knew the history of it and how it was used so that we could know our traditions today as a gift to the bishop. It was like a form of political negotiation, I suppose. And you can see the pole in this photograph, which shows the ancient histories of the 4 tribes. And then to relate back to what was happening with the children, how the children were being taken away at that time and put in St. Mike's residential school, because this all happened in 1936 to 1938, that they were creating this and put it up and had held the celebrations. But in this picture are old people that I knew, and when I was young, these children were old. But this thing that they did was a way to help them to still retain their tradition and their cultural ways, and to even though they were being sent to the residential school, this was an opportunity for them to know these things and be proud for it. So in the middle is like a woman I knew, O'Odi. Her name was Gertrude Dick, and my Uncle Tom is the little boy, Tom Dawson. And this is us in the big house having a potlatch a few years ago. And I just wanted to show this because this is the original context for all of this. All the stuff that I'm showing you is things that were happening kind of in response to the colonization of our ways and how our children were being taken away. Our culture was being made illegal. There was the attempt to transform us, and yet this is the original context within which all of these things would happen in our big house, which is also where our traditional law exists. And when the carved, what we call tlugwe, when they're danced in the big house, it affirms that those stories about the land. So this is a hisiwe that I saw at the National Museum of the American Indian in New York, and this comes from Kinkum Inlet. And for the Kinkum people, because of the story that I told you earlier about Kaudelkwa, our big treasure, they call Walasacha Tlugwa, is this wolf dance, great wolf dance. And so these hisiwe represent that. And so if in the way, I'm hoping that in the way I've explained it, that you could understand then that this is a legal document. It's not just a beautiful object. It's a legal document that tells the story of how we came to be in the land and our right to be in that place. And this is another work that shows Siwidi. And Siwidi was an ancient ancestor that went under the sea and acquired great treasures and gifts from Kuakuwa, who was the king of the sea. And when he came back to the surface of the sea, he was able to transform himself into several different characters. And they say in the stories that Siwidi visited all these different sites within our territories, and they name the sites, and they speak of all the things that happened in those sites. And one of the amazing things that happened about a year ago is that I was going through the Siwidi stories, and it talks about how Siwidi went to a place called Hada, and that he went up the river and he saw many dolphins, and then he took some dolphins and he brought them back to a certain location that was further out. And when we took a bunch of community members and elders to Hada, my cousin Mike was there, and he was talking about Hada, and he said, the baby dolphins are all born in Hada today. So that's where the dolphins will have their babies, is in Hada. And so it goes back to this very, very ancient story, and it talks about our relationship to the land. And so that's all embodied in this mask. So for my own practice, what I do, and this is a personal choice, and so I create, when I carve, I've created for our potlatches, but I haven't shown that work in a gallery setting. And I have one carving that I'm doing that I'm going to finally publicly show, but it has a conceptual reason behind it. But I won't talk about that. It'll come out in the future. But what I chose to do instead in the gallery settings was to create works like this. And this is called Bakhwanatsi, the container for souls, and it talks about the relationship of the physical and the spiritual, and it talks about the object and its meaning. So the object is represented by that glass chest in the middle of the room, and the object is beautiful. It has an aesthetic to it. But the real power of that piece is its meaning. And so in this artwork, the meaning is the shadows that are cast onto the walls, because the box is lit from the inside, and what you see on the walls is actually the shadows. So the meaning is ephemeral, and the object is solid, and we're often so drawn to the object, but for us, the actual value exists in the meanings. And I wanted to show that in this artwork. So that's what this piece means, Bakhwanatsi, the container for souls. And you can see a close-up of the box in this image. And then I did a work like this, which is it was shown at the Vancouver Art Gallery a few years ago. And in the daytime, you would see this banner, and the banner kind of spoke about the ghosts, and it spoke about the world as this great house, and it spoke about how we hoped for healing, that there would be healing. And the thing about the Vancouver Art Gallery was that it used to be the courthouse. And if you think about it, in 1907, it was around 1907 that the original courthouse was built, but basically the courthouse was the symbol, the space of law that was prosecuting our people for practicing their traditions. And so I thought about that when they asked me to do a work for the Vancouver Art Gallery, and I thought what I'll do is I'll create a work, and in the daytime it will have this kind of like prayer that mimics the Canadian flag and our relationship, and at nighttime it'll transform, so this light projection was projected then onto the courthouse, and it transformed the courthouse into the interior of a big house with the posts and the crossbeam, and what we call hlamilas, which is that great curtain, which in our big house signifies the divide between the spiritual realm and the physical realm. And we go behind that curtain, and when we come out to dance, we turn always to the left, and that shows our transformation from being a physical being to a spiritual being. So I was trying to transform the courthouse into something traditional. And then I'll just end with this work, and this was a work that was shown at the Museum of Anthropology, and it's called One Heed. which is basically means to hide or to be hidden. And I was thinking about, that relationship of display and I guess that which is hidden. And so I created this series of 8 glass chests, glass boxes, which you think of as containers. And I blackened the outside, so when you saw them from a distance, you couldn't see what was inside them. But if you got close to them and you looked down, you could see what was inside. And so they were all carved on the inside and then lit from the bottom. And then at the very bottoms were these images of our that were taken from 1936 when our elders did what they did in order to raise the pole. And I thought about the transmission of cultural information and understanding, and how they managed to find a way to transfer that information, to keep it alive for younger generations. And I think about art practice today, and I think about how it is that artists like Nick and myself are attempting to use these spaces in order to not just display tradition, but to continue tradition through strategic means, because that's the way I see my own art practice. It's a continuum of what our chiefs and our elders were doing before us, because this isn't the system or the way that that our traditions were meant to be exercised within. They were meant to be exercised within our lands, our big houses, and within our own laws and tradition. But we're being forced to adapt those things to kind of the modern world. But we are trying to use those ways, I guess, to keep it going the best way that we can. And one of the things I guess that I wanted to end with is people who are interested in our art practice, and it's a good thing to be interested in it, but like what Nick said, if you're interested in the art practice, please be interested in the issues behind those works as well. And our people today are fighting on the land. Right now, the Musqueam and many of the Kuakuwa are really fighting the fish farms in their territory. And so they're going out there and they're occupying those fish farms, and they're saying, we want these things out of there because it's going to destroy our way of life. And if you care about our artwork, then care about us and care about the issues that we're fighting for. So I'm asking you for your support in all of that. Gila Kesla.